Hey friends, I am so excited that you would spend a little bit of time with me. I'm Amy Burkett, and I have spent my entire life interviewing folks. It's one of my favorite things to get to know people because people have so many amazing stories. So you are starting at the very first of what's going to be my new book, The Dirty F Word. And if you know anything about me in television, I have spent 30 years in broadcast television, commercial television as an anchor and a reporter. And then I switched to public television, a documentarian, worked my way up the leadership ranks to leading a public television station. But really, I'm a student of leadership and I love learning. And the dirty F word that we're talking about, I know you figured it out. We're talking about failure. And we've all had it. We can't avoid it, but we sure can learn from it. And so that's the purpose. Every week throughout this year, I'm going to interview another one of my friends who is willing to share a leadership lesson really about their biggest failures in their lives, what they learned from it, and how they applied those lessons to the rest of their life. So I couldn't be more excited than to have the opportunity to bring my good friend, Greg Storch. He is a former Navy officer and a gentleman. And I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you a little more about him. Thanks, Greg, for being with me.
Hi, Amy. How are you? Thanks for having me. This is great.
Tell us about, we met back in 2016 when you got your John Maxwell certification as a trainer, speaker, and coach. And I had had mine for a few years. I actually got certified in 2012, but we've been fast friends ever since. And you've got this amazing story of the dirty F word. Sometimes I feel like I have to whisper when I say it, but I really look forward and appreciate you so much for your willingness to share it with us.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Let me share a little bit about myself then. I was born and raised in Daytona Beach, and at a very young age, I joined the Navy. I was 17 years old. I ended up doing almost 24 years on active duty. I retired in 2009, and from active duty military, I went into the federal sector, and I was the director of human resources at a naval hospital in South Carolina. And just a few years into that role, a friend of mine convinced me to go to Washington, D.C., who thought that was a good idea, and get back into the IT industry, which was my background in the Navy. And so I moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and I worked in the private IT industry for almost 7 years. And just as I was approaching the 7 year mark, I made a huge decision to walk away from all of that and begin my own company, Lion Enterprise, which is a leadership development and coaching business.
Now, hold on. So you were one of those guys who were bringing in a big six-figure salary and you
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
tossed it aside. Why?
Yeah, absolutely. It's this growing up, you heard these sayings like money isn't everything. But, when you're young, it is. It means a lot. And back in the day, one of my primary focuses was on money. And what I quickly learned in that 7 years was it does not buy you happiness and it is not everything. And I actually ended up in the hospital for 3 days from a stress induced problem. And it was all because of that job. It was extremely stressful for me. And that's the wake up call I had to just reevaluate and consider what I was doing if I was working in where I was passionate about. And I learned that I wasn't. And so I made the decision to walk away from all of it.
When you walked away, uh, what were the challenges with that? And then not only did you walk away from a DC job, like you left the United States completely not long after that.
That's true. I had just started Lion Enterprise when my wife found out she was offered a position she had applied for in northern Italy. And so within the first 6 months that year, we found ourselves having to arrange for a move overseas. So, but coming to that decision really took some introspection and, quizzing myself. I really was not happy. And so I started really thinking into what I was good at. What did people come to me? When people asked for my help, what was it that they were asking me for. And so I mean, it was a no brainer. People naturally come to me for advice and guidance. I found that over the years, I'm a builder of leaders. So that's what I knew I needed to be doing, and I hadn't been doing it. So that's what prompted me to start pursuing leadership development.
Well, let's now really get into that dirty F word and the big failures. We've got to go way back to you being a
Mhm.
young Navy enlisted person. And it started out, things went pretty well. Tell us a little bit about how things were going for you in the beginning and what kind of led up to one of the biggest failures of your life.
Yeah, one of the biggest failures I've ever experienced in my life was while I was on active duty. And, when I think back and I think over, the failures I've experienced, this one really pops out and comes to the surface right away. And so when I joined the Navy, I found myself starting to excel at an early start. I was promoting earlier than my peers. I was ahead of the promotion schedule. I was receiving awards and accolades. I was actually selected as Sailor of the Year, not only for the command that I was stationed at, but I went on to compete and win Sailor of the Year for the entire Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, and which is where you're competing against sailors from all over the world that are in the medical profession. So it was pretty much a charmed career in the Navy.
So you
And
were one of
so
those guys where everything, you had what's called the Midas touch or whatever. People hated you. Everything worked out well for you.
it was interesting because there were those people who, yes, weren't fans of mine, but a majority of the people started looking up to me. They thought I was, this fantastic sailor and I was setting the example for others to emulate. And that put a lot of weight on my shoulders. And of course, it also inflated my ego because, when I was younger, it was easy to have your ego inflated. And so I thought I was just, a bag of chips. And so all of these things, all of these successes led to me transitioning from being enlisted to an officer.
Now,
And
hold on there. I've got to understand a little bit. And for people who don't have any
Mhm.
military experience, to be able to move up the ranks the way you were, to be able to be highly regarded as you were in the military, you had to pay attention to detail. I want to know a little bit about when they do inspections and
Yeah.
and just how crazy that is, just so people understand this is not easy to move up the ranks.
Yeah, inspections were interesting, and this is where this attention to detail and this perfection is drilled into. And anybody watching this who has served in the military or knows somebody who has served or is serving will be able to understand this. When you're standing in inspection, the inspectors are looking at your uniform. And in the Navy, one of the things they're looking at is having your shirt buttons and the crease of your shirt, the line, lining up with your belt buckle and your zipper, a straight line. And it's called, in the
Crazy.
Navy, they call it a gig line. And, the inspectors have rulers. There's measurements for your ribbons and your name tag and your rating badges on your sleeves. Everything has to be perfectly aligned and spaced. And if not, there's a penalty. You're going to fail the inspection first of all. And if you fail, what that means is you're coming back on the weekend when everybody else is on liberty, not at work and having a good time. You're getting back in your uniform, going back to your duty station and standing out there for an inspection again.
So those
So,
little early failures actually taught you a lot. But let's get to the big one.
yeah.
You've advanced, you've mastered that. You had the name tag in the right space, the buttons lined with your zipper. I mean, you've got it almost mastered, and it's time for a really big move.
It is. It is. So in the Navy, it's possible to go from the enlisted ranks right into the officer ranks. And so I applied for a program in the Navy that allowed me to do that. And the requirements were very stringent. There was an instruction or an order that was written that gave specific guidelines on exactly what needed to be in that package. You know, you had to have pictures and you had to have letters of recommendation and community service and college classes, all of these things. And they had to be in the right order, written the right way. It was very, we talked about this attention to detail. This thing was attention to detail, but here's this successful sailor of the year, the guy that can do no wrong, right? So I take this instruction, I'm like, I got this. And so I assembled my own commissioning package and I submitted it to get my commission as an officer. And, I was sure that I was going to get commissioned straight away. Well, that didn't happen.
Ooh.
And people were shocked to learn that I was not selected for that commission. And I was like,
Wh-
what
Why
went
do you think
wrong?
you weren't selected?
Well, that's a great question, Amy. I had that same question. Why? What happened? And the first thing I did was I took my package to somebody who had actually successfully gotten commissioned through the same program the year before mine. And I said, could you look at my package? And they took my package and they opened it up and started thumbing through it. And they were just shaking their head. They're like, why did you do that? Where's this? You missed that. You didn't have this. I had missed or didn't follow directions enough to make my package the right way. And
You,
so I got passed up.
and you and I talked about this, and as we
Mm,
said, each week I'm going to share a failure story from a real life friend.
mm.
And you titled this chapter, which will be turned into a book at the end of the year. You had a really, you said, Amy, I've got a story for you and I've got a title for the chapter. What is it, my friend?
Yeah. We need to call this chapter Pride Comes Before the Fall.
So
And
you
that's
didn't pay attention to detail, even though you were pretty detail oriented. But is the biggest thing that you didn't ask anyone to look it over before you sent it in?
yeah, that's exactly it. Is the lesson I learned from that was I needed help from others, but I was too proud to ask for that. I mean, why would I need help? I didn't need help with anything else. I got to where I was before, and all that was false. I got everywhere from the help of others. And so the thing is, I didn't learn that lesson right away, but I did know to get help with my second package. And so the board only met once a year. So the following year, I put in another package, but the difference was I got help. I asked for help and I was given help by people who had gone before me, in prior enlisted sailors who had received their commission. And I put that package together with their help and submitted it. And 8 months later, I received my commission. And so it worked. And that's when I learned a huge lesson from that failure. And the reason it stands out is because, hearing my story up until that point, I had gotten everything I ever wanted. I got promotions, I got awards, I got recognition. I got the duty stations I ever asked for. If I asked for a
How
place,
old were
I
you
got,
at that time, Greg?
oh, we're talking at, building up to this, I'm only in my 20s, my mid to late 20s. So not, I got my commission in my late 20s. So yeah, not that old, but having that first failure, not getting something you've planned for or were expecting, and having that mindset that you're untouchable, that of course you're going to get it. That first no is really the pinprick that pops your ego bubble.
Mm.
And that clears the fog from your head to realize, where did I go wrong? What could have I done better? And what's coming next for me? So that's when I asked for help and it worked. I ended up getting the commission. So, we don't get anywhere in life without the help of other people. And that's the lesson I learned. And I've carried that with me for all of these years, 30 plus years now, is we don't do anything alone.
We talk about sometimes a setback can be a
Mhm.
set up. And so you shared that you lead your own professional development business now and how much you
Mhm.
love people. And I've seen you with people and I've seen you excel and speaking nationally on stage. And you have this charisma about you that I've seen people be drawn to you.
Mhm.
But yet you learned the lesson in your late 20s. You had a
Mhm.
successful military career, but I want you to fast forward now to sort of how your military career ended.
Yeah. So in the military, now as an officer, I'm no longer taking advancement exams for promotion as an enlisted sailor. I'm now an officer, and it's required that my record go before a board for my promotions. And at that time, I was a lieutenant, which is an O3 in the military. And I was up for promotion to an O4, a lieutenant commander. Well, during that promotion, you only get two looks by the board and they only meet once a year. So I was in zone, which means it's your time to be looked at by the board in the zone. So my packet, my record, my service record went in front of the board, and which is made up of naval officers from all over the world. They convene in Washington, D.C. into a closed room, and they decide on the promotions of all these officers. And so the first time I got looked at, the first year I was eligible, I got overlooked. I didn't get selected for promotion. And so I knew I still had one more look the following year. So I got busy preparing myself for my next board and made sure that the things I thought were deficient were addressed. And so I prepared the package. My command, where I was stationed, they got behind me and they were helping me to get positioned the best way possible for promotion. And so the promotion board convened again the following year, and it was time for my package. My package went in.
Stop.
Yes.
So you had people behind you helping you and
Mhm.
supporting you because after
Yep.
that first big dirty F word failure, you realized you weren't too proud to ask for help.
Correct.
So you had been doing this, but yet you're nearing the end of your career in the
Mhm.
military. About how many years? You'd had over 20 years in the
Oh
military?
yeah, we're talking 23 and a half. I'm approaching 24 years in the Navy at this point when this is all happening.
So it's the second review.
Second review.
Bring it
Eh,
on.
yeah. So in the hospital I worked at, actually in Naples, Italy, we had a boss. My boss, my military boss, was the director for administration, and that's the guy who gets the results first. The message comes to him. And so he got the results when they came out, and I was waiting in my office. I was the chief information officer of the Naval Hospital in Naples. And I'm sitting in my office, I'm working away. I know the results are due. And I'll never forget this. Commander Rich Haggerty walks in my office, great guy. And he opens the door and he sits down in the chair in front of my desk. And I'm looking at him like, well, and I'll never forget the look on Rich's face when he just hung his head and he shook it. And immediately, uncontrollably, I burst into tears at my desk. Here's this grown man, an officer, bawling like a little baby at his desk in front of his boss. And so um, it wasn't the rejection, it was fear. It
Ah,
was,
because what
yeah,
did that mean? Because, that had some pretty big implications that came after missing that promotion for the second time.
it did. So being passed over a second time and not making that hurdle over to O4 meant I had to go home. And that's what happens to any officer that doesn't make that jump. Whether they have only 10 years in the Navy, 17 years in the Navy, or 20 years, you're going home. You're going to be released from active duty. Now, luckily for me, I was retirement eligible. So my option was to put in my retirement papers and leave and retire from the Navy. But there's officers who leave the Navy at 17, 18, 19 years and they miss out on retirement. because they fail to promote. So fail to promote. And
That
that was
dirty
me.
F word again. I hate that
I
word.
so I mean, that was me. I failed to select. That's what it's called. Fail to select. Isn't that ironic?
It is, but I think it's a different lesson than what you learned the first time you said it was pride.
Yeah.
The second time I heard you just mention briefly, but you jumped over it very quickly. Fear.
Yeah.
Talk to us more about that dirty F word of fear that was tied to that big failure that kicked you out of the military and uh, sent you on a new journey and a new path.
Yeah. You know, failure can create fear in, when you experience that. And it did, because if you can imagine, I've been doing something for almost 24 straight years. And so I'm in a comfort zone. I've never gotten out of my comfort zone. I knew everything I was doing, I was the best at it. And what was happening was, when I was told that I failed to select, my whole world stopped, because I knew that was the end. And the fear was because I was going to have to get out of my comfort zone and do something I hadn't done in 24 years, and that was be a civilian. And I had no idea how to do that. So fear set in quickly, and it brought me to tears. I was scared. That it was fear that was overtaking me in that office that day. And so yeah, I came to the realization that, man, why am I like this? And it was because I was afraid.
But so many years doing the same thing, the fear of the unknown is often concerning to so many people, but that willingness to go to the next step, to go to the next chapter of your life, had you stayed in, might not have gotten you to where you are today, my friend. So
Yeah.
that failure might have, I think I see it as a setup for the next chapter.
It actually, yeah, this was a setback. I mean, a setup, not a setback. And here's the thing is, I had this gut feeling the Navy had changed over the 20 plus years I had served. It wasn't the same Navy, and it shouldn't have been. And I knew it was getting close to becoming the time for me to go. I just was not, I couldn't make the call myself because I was too afraid. I was too comfortable to call it. And so the Navy called it for me. And a few years later, I was able to actually be like, you know what? You know, seeing where I ended up, and that everything was okay, and I actually ended up in a great place, and that there was life after this. I was so thankful that the Navy had the wisdom to actually send me home, because it was my time to go out of the service and start the next chapter. I just couldn't see it because I was so immersed in my comfort zone. I was blind.
Such great wisdom comes from our failures so many
Yeah.
times, and the wisdom that you have, and what a amazing military career that you've had. But I appreciate you
Mhm.
sharing those professional failures and the lessons that you learned from it. But now,
Sure.
sometimes it's a little harder to share a personal story, but you have a pretty big one of those as well. So if you're willing to talk about it, I'd love you to share it with our listeners.
Yeah, I would be glad to. If anybody can learn from my failures, I'm happy to share them. I'm not embarrassed by my failures anymore. I used to be, but I've learned that failures are really lessons. We just need the wisdom to go back and get the lesson from it. So, and they're opportunities to shift. So, you are familiar with this story, but when I was on towards the end of my active duty time, probably a little after the midway point, I was on deployment on a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, heading to the Middle East for exercises with the Marines. As Navy medicine personnel, we support the Marines when they deploy. And so I was a medical planner and I had to deploy with them. So I'm on a deployment. It's 6 months long. I'm probably 3 months into the deployment at this point. So we're still heading to the Middle East. And I receive a letter from my wife, and she's basically saying she's taking the kids and she's going to leave. And when I arrive home, they're not going to be there. And so this is how I learned of my
Heartbreaking.
divorce. Yeah.
That's a Dear John letter, isn't it? Of the worst kind.
That's exactly. I was that guy on that cruise, that on that deployment, the guy that got the Dear John letter. That was me, and I got it. And there was nothing I could do. I was helpless. I'm floating on a United States naval warship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. What am I going to do? So I'm what I'm facing is returning home on December 20th of that year to an empty house. And my wife's gone and my
Holidays.
children are gone.
You had 2 children at that time, right? About how old would they have been?
Yeah, Stephen and Katie were only 4 and 6 years old. They were just babies. I mean, Katie hadn't even gone to kindergarten yet. So this is a long time ago, because now Katie is a nurse and married, and she's 26, and my son's going to be 30 next year. So at the end of this year. So this is a long, long time ago, but it's a huge failure because I had been married almost a full decade. It produced these two wonderful children. And, you think you're on it. I'm a commissioned officer. I'm married. I've got 2 kids. Life's grand. And out of the blue, we're not going to be here when you get back. It was like, what? And so that was a huge personal failure for me. And
But what do you think caused it? What was the dirty F word, your failure or your part? I know it takes 2 to tango, so to speak, and there's perhaps blame on each side, but you own up to your part of it.
yeah, and not at first, Amy, really. I mean, and I think a lot of us have a tendency to initially want to find something or someone to blame for our failures, instead of looking inward and wondering what we did to contribute to them. So naturally, I'm blaming everyone and everything for the breakup of my marriage except myself. And it took a year or two to calm down and start thinking back and saying, wait a minute, I have to take responsibility for myself. And so I don't control the actions of other people, just myself. So what was it that I did that contributed to the failure of the marriage? And, obviously communication's huge. I wasn't a great communicator. And so that was one of the things I was able to find, in myself, was I really need to communicate better. But there's a bigger lesson, really, that I learned. And what it was I was very selfish. I couldn't think of anybody but myself. It was all about me. And I realized, my ex-wife had dreams and she wanted to do things in life. And I had no idea what those things were because I was so involved in myself that I didn't have the awareness to even be involved in a relationship and care about somebody. I didn't know how to do that. So the biggest lesson from the failure of my marriage was making a shift from being selfish to selfless. And that's what's made all the difference. And it's really ironic that we're having our discussion tonight because today I'm celebrating my 18th wedding anniversary with my wife, Samantha. So,
How
um,
exciting. So let's talk about that selfless, excuse me, to go from selfish to selfless. What are some
mhm,
of the things that you do in this, your successful second marriage to
mhm.
Samantha? Uh, Give us examples so that we can really understand how you apply that.
Yeah, it's, I think the biggest thing is you have to create an awareness in yourself that you are selfish first. If you can't, it's like the first step is, admitting you have the problem. So, spending time with yourself and asking do I think of other people first? or do I put myself first? And I could clearly answer that long ago that it was me. It was all me and my career. And so that's the first thing is you have to do a self-assessment and realize and admit that I'm selfish. And then once you're able to identify that, the next thing is to put forth an effort, take action on that awareness. And that action is doing things that remove the focus away from you and puts it on other people. And that's an active activity that you have to do. And so, for example, when my wife and I would talk about moving overseas, I wouldn't talk first. I would listen first. I
Mm.
would hear what she had to say, what she wanted to do, what she thought about the move. Then I would share my thoughts and we would discuss the things and we would come to what I love to call common ground, which is one of the key things you have to have in order to connect with other people. And that includes your spouse. And so putting other people first allows you to find common ground real quick, especially if you actively listen to them. So that those are the big tips.
Huge tips, huge tips. Before we run out of time and we're going to wrap this up, nobody wants to uh, consider themselves the lessons that they learn from their failures. It is the dirty F word. Uh, but what we learn and how we apply it, and how all of those failures that you shared with us at this time really made you a better man every
Absolutely.
step of the way.
Absolutely. It
I
did.
just love you to go over those biggest failures and rattle them off and what you learned, just thinking in your head that first failure of the pride goes before a fall. And you
Yeah.
learned humility and so much, relying on others.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first failure I met was being passed over for my commission. And the lesson from that was we don't get anywhere. We don't achieve anything significant in life without the help of others. It just doesn't happen. And if you look back and look at all your successes, you'll be able to name people who helped you along the road to get to where you're at. I guarantee it. That was the huge lesson. And then the second big lesson on the professional side was when I was passed over and I had to retire. And sometimes fear paralyzes us and keeps us in our comfort zones, and we can't, a setback is really a setup.
So
And
that
so,
failure was really just the next step. It was a stepping stone, like you said, a setup. You needed that because you were
correct.
too afraid to go out on your own and see what life after the military was like. But it was so good. You earned more money than you'd ever earned in the military, in the private world, right?
Yes, silly money and more than I could ever imagine, ever. And I mean, I remember dreaming of salary and how much I would want to make, and it far exceeded any of that. And so, yeah, it was an open door to a new world and a successful career. So you're right.
And that next step to helping others. If we never fail or never admit that we failed, never recognize our failures in life, how are we relatable to other people? And in the world that you're in now as professional development,
Mhm.
that those failures help you be even more significant, which is something we like to say in the John Maxwell team, as opposed to looking at success, but looking at significance, how
Mhm.
we're being able to help others be successful and significant. That was so critical to you.
Yes. As leaders, people are always watching you and what you're doing. And what they don't want to see is somebody they can't relate to. Everybody fails. And if you come across as a leader who portrays this perfection, your followers will not relate to that. And so being able to set aside your ego and admit your failures and talk about your failures and share your failures, don't hide them from the public. That makes you much more relatable. And then people will be more inclined to follow you because it's more realistic. They can relate to who you are and what you're doing. So I never hide my failures anymore. I share them all the time, and I've got plenty of them.
Yeah, we don't have much time. We're running out of time. So, and personal failure of shifting from selfishness to
Mm,
selflessness in a marriage and having better communication, which is really instead of talking, that begins with listening
yeah.
more. And how
Yeah.
we're so happy for you and the success that you have, and happy anniversary to you and Sam
Thank you.
right now. Before we run out of time, I want people to know about your weekly roar and a little more about Lion Enterprises and how they can connect with you.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, Lion Enterprise, you can find the website at lion-enterprise.com. Go to the website and check us out. And every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, you can catch me in the Facebook group called The Lion's Den. And I'll be giving a 20 to 30-minute talk every Wednesday on leadership and personal growth topics. It's been going on for 2 years, 2.5 years now. I'm live every Wednesday. I don't miss a beat. So it's free. I'd love to have you guys join us.
Oh, it's great. And it's inspiring, and it's a group of people who share similar values
Mhm.
to be able to make a positive impact on our world. And you, my friend,
Yes.
are making a huge positive impact on our world. I know you're working, helping people transition from the military now.
Yes. Yes.
How
I'm
exciting.
working with the Army now on their transition program, and I'm helping service members actually transition from active duty back into the civilian world. Go figure.
Oh, it's amazing. Greg Storch, thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
your dirty F words with us. Failures have made you the man that you are today.
Mhm.
And I really am honored that you would share them with our group, and so honored to call you my very dear friend.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's my pleasure.
Until the next time on the Dirty F Word, we hope you tune in because there's so much more to learn.